on there, but so welcome to New Perspectives, and very nice to have you, Sraddhalu, here today. For those that are joining us, you know that this is part of an 8-part series on Savitri that New Perspectives has been hosting. And today it is an honor to have Sraddhalu here with us, who will address the science of Savitri. So Sri Aurobindo's Savitri abounds in references to science, both material and occult. And in this discussion, Sraddhalu will explore some of these passages and correlate them with some of the current and emergent discoveries and theories of modern science and technology. Sraddhalu Ranade is a scientist, educator, and scholar residing at the Sri Aurobindo ashram. He has influenced over 5,000 teachers throughout India through his immersive workshops on integral education, and has traveled all over the world in over 30 countries, delivering lectures and conducting workshops on integral education, management by consciousness, esoteric sciences, self-development, the integral yoga, and spiritual practices. Sraddhalu has addressed corporate groups from a variety of sectors and has been a speaker at several Rotary International conferences, the United Nations, and other forums. So once again, we welcome you, Sraddhalu, and if you are all set in terms of recording on your side, we can go ahead and begin.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I'm happy to be with all of you. Unfortunately, I have a session which is at the same time as you, so I cannot be more often. But this topic is very close to my heart because I had a very interesting experience, or let's say approach, with Sri Aurobindo regarding science. Being temperamentally from childhood oriented to a deeper understanding of science, where I felt there had to be a way to unify physical science, the occult sciences, as well as the spiritual sciences, and view the entire thing in one continuum. I was looking for hints in Sri Aurobindo's writings, because he's the master who has pretty much all knowledge. Except I thought, technology aspects, mathematics, he himself says I'm not very good at maths and so on. And then I discovered in some of his writings, he speaks of a science which is so advanced that it bridges all three domains, but against which current physical science almost pales. One of these passages you will find in his little article, which is found in his writings on the Vedas, which is published in the title of the first Rik of the Rig Veda. And here he describes the working of the sun and the 7 kinds of fire, the 7 kinds of light, and then he discusses how the sun's electric energy and various things relating it to the Vedic deities as psychological cosmic deities and with physical implications. And then he ends with this very interesting sentence. He says, right or wrong, this is the physics of the Veda. And straight away you realize here is somebody who has such a deep knowledge, so advanced, that against it, the current science is almost like a child playing in a sand pit. And so there's not much that he can say without seeming either too far off or too abstract or even wrong. And then, of course, we find in his Life Divine, in essays on the Gita and various letters, all kinds of things, knowledge which you couldn't have had by current means and far ahead of current science. In one letter, he even says, every solar system in the universe has 13 planets. That's it, just like that. Why? Well, we have found 10 in our solar system. If you include the asteroid belt, which is a broken planet, Pluto would be the 10th. And we know there is another one, and there's a third and one more. So we already can see from the disruption of orbits that there are 12 planets beyond the sun, maybe a 13th. But Sri Aurobindo's observation straight away suggests that there is an underlying law which physics will eventually catch up with. And then he writes that there is a correlation between the atomic model and the model of the solar system with spinning particles around a central core, and he says which to the occultist would open new insights. And the mind of the occultist is different from the mind of a physical scientist. So with this background, in my explorations in Savitri, which of course is the text which is the most revelatory in a sense, and Mother says it has all knowledge, and yet because all knowledge has to be squeezed into a book, it is all very condensed. And often a single line in Savitri will have multiple paragraphs in his other writings in terms of elaboration and explanation. So my interest here was to share a few things relating to science. But since I've spoken on this topic a little bit in the past, especially on the material aspects of it, this time I want to go into the more occult spiritual with links on the or implications on the material. So I'll start with the passage which very few would even think is a science passage. And this is the first page of the book 6, the Book of Fate, Canto 1, the Word of Fate. Now in this, we are preparing. Savitri has just met Satyavan. She has decided to marry him. She is about to declare this to her father. And now the crisis is going to happen because Narad is going to appear there and then say, this day arriving, Satyavan must die. But how does Narad appear? Remember, it's not just an allegorical story. There is a whole physical, real dimension to it. Narad appears in the courtroom of the king in front of everybody and has a whole interaction with them. And he starts by singing and singing to them of the higher worlds and the higher purpose of life and so on. But how does he appear there? Because he does not belong to the physical world. This whole entry process of how he comes into the material world is described in the first 1.5 pages of this canto. And I won't read large portions because you're all familiar with this text, but I'll just touch upon a few lines. In the very first sentence, he has just come bordering the mortal's plane, crossing a wide expanse of brilliant peace. Narad, the heavenly sage from paradise, came chanting through a large and lustrous air. Attracted by the golden summer earth that lay beneath him like a glowing bowl tilted upon the table of the gods. So the scene is as if from a space position where you're seeing the entire solar system whirling around the sun. And our earth is lit up by the sun with the light on one side. It's summertime, at least in the place where he's going to come, and the earth's tilt makes for the light to be tilted. Now, you would say it's space, as if from a spaceship. No, there's more. It's actually an occult experience. When you enter from the subtle world and engage with the physical world, you sense the physical world's mood first. And that's this summer bowl of the earth. And the tilt of the earth, which is a tilt of the seasonal energy. You know, the Uttarayan, the sun swings to the south and then begins to turn north again. That turning point is a turning in the tides between the occult worlds and the physical worlds. I've spoken about this recently, so I won't repeat. But this turn of the tide is critical because from that point on, automatically the rising energies grow, and they say for the souls who are bound and unable to rise into the higher worlds, that's when the lift happens. Now, this experience of the tilt, the tide, is actually a description of the tilt. He's seeing the earth and the summer and this tilt of the alignment of the energies upon the table of the gods. And he wants to come to catch the warmth and blaze of a small sun. You know, our sun is one of the smaller ones in the cosmos. So it gives you a sense of somebody who lives in a cosmic consciousness now turns to this sun and this earth. But how does he appear? Because finally he's going to appear in physical body, but he's not in physical body. And this description is the most fascinating because it actually describes the materialization of consciousness. And it is scientific, you'll see. Below him circling burned the myriad suns. He bore the ripples of the etheric sea. A primal air brought the first joy of touch. A secret spirit drew its mighty breath, contracting and expanding this huge world in its formidable circuit through the void. The secret might of the creative fire displayed its triple power to build and form. And he continues. I'm going to pause here because I'm setting a context. You notice already he has described primal air and then secret fire. And before that has to be ether, after that has to be water and earth, the 5 elements. So it's as if Narad is passing through these 5 elements. Why is he passing through them? And then finally, as he comes to the large part, entering the physical domain, which also is described very precisely, his song changes. Where earlier he was singing of the higher realms, now he begins to sing of the suffering of the earth and the future of the evolution, which will again unite with the higher realms. What is this transition through 5 stages in which the mood of his consciousness changes? And why these 5 stages? If we go deep enough, and you will see passages in the synthesis of yoga, in the Life Divine, and in essays on the Gita, he speaks of how everything is formed out of 5 elemental states of consciousness, where a consciousness which is unformed, indivisible, timeless, spaceless, forms itself into space, time, form, separate, division, and piece, and innumerable infinity of infinitesimal pieces. How does this happen from here to here? It is impossible to cut something which is indivisible. So the consciousness of oneness itself has to take on multiple aspects, and the stages by which those multiple aspects become rigidly felt as colliding pieces are the 5 stages. But in practice, when you materialize an object from a higher grade, let's say you visualize, conceive an apple, and then you were to materialize it, or you were in the subtle body or in a subtle bodiless consciousness, and then went through the materialization process, you would actually have to gather material in these 5 gradations or stages. The way spirit materializes itself to become matter, well, your consciousness, which is now formless and free, must go through the same process that spirit goes through in forming the universe. Or even if you were in subtle body, you would go through the same 5-stage process, and this is what he is describing. It's actually occult knowledge, spiritual knowledge, of course, but occult knowledge and physical knowledge also. Because in one of the talks with Pavitrada, he discusses how science is going from the below material of the 5 elements, material, and then the water element, and now has entered the fire element. Soon it will discover the 3rd fire, and after that will be the air element, which is the basis for all contact and communication, and then the etheric element will come later. So already that's when you'll have all the forces, including gravitation and mastery of all the forces. So he's looking at the timeline of science's development in terms of the 5 elements, going bottom up. And here we're going top down in terms of materialization. We are going from matter upwards to the root cause of matter. But really it is hardcore science of technological implications, and yet it is occult science and spiritual science. So first he says, he bore the ripples of the etheric sea, because this is the etheric condition where pure consciousness now ripples in relation to itself. It doesn't change. It only changes relationship with itself. And these are experienced as ripples, shifts in intensities, more intense, less intense, which is what you feel as waves of consciousness meeting itself. There is obviously nothing like form here. There's no force. There is only ripples of joy, perhaps even, of force, perhaps, of intensities, and so on. The next stage, a primal air brought the first joy of touch. So with the ether principle, you have what we would normally describe as the hearing, the vibration, because it's pure sound vibration. That is etheric sound. The Omkar, you will say, the Pranava, which is unheard, and so on. But in the air principle, you have the touch. And you see what happens with air, you go, you feel the air touching your finger, but you don't see the air. You can't smell, taste. You just feel the touch. So this is the reason why it is called the air principle, which Sri Aurobindo explains elsewhere. What happens here? Those vibrations which are in the ether now begin to interact with each other. Waves push waves, but there's no stability. It's only one wave passing through another, which ripples and pushes. And so you have forces, touch, contact. But the characteristic of air is only it can pass right through each other and so expand and contract. What was earlier ripples now has expansion and contraction. And you can have spaces which are intensely expanded or intensely contracted. I don't go too much into the physics because it can get technical, but you can look at it this way. If you've seen people creating forms through vibrations, you'll hear somebody chant or make a sound, and then there are sand grains which arrange themselves. Why? Because certain spaces are highly contracted, certain spaces are highly condensed, highly expanded, moving more or moving less. And so the grains of sand automatically coalesce in those places which are less moving, more condensed. And that's how the patterns are created. But the patterns seem to be stable, except they're not. They're changing. They're fluid. And patterns can as if pass through each other, but also touch each other. But there's no stability of form. The next step does that. So contract, a secret spirit, I come back to air. A primal air brought the first touch of joy. A secret spirit drew its mighty breath, contracting and expanding this huge world in its formidable circuit through the void. Here's something fascinating. This huge world is just made of these contractions and expansions of the gigantic original breath of the Lord. But, a very interesting suggestion, in its formidable circuit through the void, suggesting that there's a circuit, a circle where things go around and round. Now, at a very intuitive level, we notice everything is whirling. Even particles are whirling, planets are whirling, galaxies are whirling, super galaxies are whirling. Perhaps intuitively, we feel the entire universe is whirling, and maybe there's a center of the universe. Perhaps. This, by the way, is one of the more recent physics theories, that the universe itself is eternal and is in a whirl. But there's another kind of whirl, a whirl which is not just physical rotation, but it is a whirl where things emerge and subside, and again emerge and subside. And so that's one of the theories, that the universe is in fact a permanent thing. There was no great big bang or so from which it began. Because everywhere, the more deep we look in the universe, we find the farther you go back, you find still complete galaxies. More recently, barely 3 days ago, there was this news item that they find complete, solid, large, gigantic galaxies in the farthest edge of the universe when there should be no galaxies, because that's when the Big Bang is supposed to have happened. But the suggestion Sri Aurobindo has, even from his writings on the Upanishads, is, well, the universe is eternal. It may have rhythms, but still it is eternal. And so there are these rhythms also, which is this sense of the formidable circuit through the void. Now comes the third element. The secret might of the creative fire, and this is the sight principle also, displayed its triple power to build and form. So with the fire principle now, what were earlier contacts of forces pushing, pulling, but no stable form, they enter into whirls. You saw the repetition of the whirl already was there in the air principle. Now this whirl becomes a thing in itself, and with a certain intensity of interaction that binds the whirls with each other. And so you have the first appearance of stable form. Now the form is stable, but it is not rigid. It can be soft, it can be even transparent, in the sense that your hand could pass right through, but the form would be stable. Like fire. Look at a flame. Your finger can pass right through it, but the flame is still there, isn't it? So that's why fire becomes a good physical fire, becomes a representative of this principle. But the triple fire is the very Vedic phrase where they speak of the 3 tongues or sometimes 7 tongues. And they represent 3 levels of operation of this principle. And fire is described in the Veda as the builder of forms. So this is the stage where you have an appearance of form. Now, I'm going to describe this from an occult point of view. Narad is in his disembodied state of consciousness. First, there is this condensation where there is a rippling, where he's preparing to enter into materialization. And then there is the expansion and contraction, the forces felt. At that point on earth, they will feel, something here, some presence is felt. But you cannot see, there's no form. Narad has not yet fully materialized. At this point, when he comes to the third stage, you will see a form of a being half materialized. Depending on the degree of materialization, 3 fires, you have 3 degrees of materialization. In the densest, literally you can touch. In the middle one, you can see, but it looks solid, but it's soft, or you can pass right through and it is not rigid. And in the first grade, which is the finest, you may even see a translucent form. So corresponding to the 3 degrees of the fire principle are actually 3 degrees of materialization in form, but not yet stability in the form. So this, especially the third phase, requires the support of the next 2 in the degree of materialization. It requires the next 2 principles. So the secret might of the creative fire displayed its triple power to build and form. And then its infinitesimal wave sparks weaving dance. Wave and spark, wave particle is the vocabulary of modern physics. What you have is substantiality which has particulate behavior and is yet really wave. The particulation has not become rigid enough. So for science which goes bottom up, first it thinks, everything is made of particles. Once it crosses a certain threshold in the ascent, it says, it's not particle, it's wave. How can it be wave and particle at the same time? So you have a wave-particle duality and science is confused. But going bottom at the top down, you are wave first, which then condenses into particulate behavior, waves which rhythm and repeat themselves to become as if rigid. Again, we have very concrete physical examples. If you have ever seen a smoke ring, it's a good example of that. A smoke ring, let's say you can even do it with incense. You put incense in a box and cut a tiny hole and then tap the box. People who smoke do it with their mouth. They go, what? And it's as if a ring comes out. As you tap the box, a ring comes out. It's whirling smoke. It maintains a ring form, continues to move all across the room until it dissipates. Now, the character of this is fascinating. It's actually fluid moving, but it keeps rigidity. It does not disperse easily. Now, if you take 2 of these ring particles from 2 different sides, smoke rings, they're flowing. If they come together, they will bounce off as if they're particles. Fascinating. How does this happen? And it's pure fluid dynamics. So this gives you a model to understand how fluid flows in the ether could actually be seen as particles lower down in the scale of the 5 elements. Or particles would eventually be perceived to be whirling rings, or there are other forms in which it can happen. So its infinitesimal wave sparks weaving dance, its nebulous units grounding shape and mass. So it's still nebulous, it's smoky, like we've seen with the smoke ring. Now it's energy rings moving like particles, but it's still nebulous, smoky. But grounding shape and mass, giving it distinctiveness of form, but also the character of mass. Now remember, your smoke ring has no mass, practically speaking. And yet these 2 smoke rings which came, they bounced off each other as if they were billiard balls, as if they have mass. And depending on how big or how rapidly the smoke moves, you will have the effect of greater mass or lesser mass. Mass itself is an illusion, or a phenomenal representation of something which is essentially massless. And he's describing this, its nebulous units grounding shape and mass, giving it the materiality of the shape and mass, but itself not being made of shape or mass, it is nebulous. Magic foundation and pattern of a world. So this is almost like a magical transition, but this is going to build the foundation with which the whole physical world is going to be built. Its radiance bursting into the light of stars. So the same fire principle, when it concentrates intensely and bursts as a thing in itself, you have the light of the stars. So in the physics today, they will say the stars are like solar cookers. They cook or they compress hydrogen to build all the other elements by compression, by a nuclear process. All the other elements are built like in a pressure cooker. But isn't that the function of fire? Builder of forms, remember? And the triple fire on 3 levels or three different gradations, it builds forms. And then the next step, as he has come to this stage, what is his experience as he's materializing? He becomes aware of the physical world, but first as a perception only. And then he touches the vibration of the physical world. And that's not a very comfortable experience, because now you're as if experiencing the invasion of the physical world's consciousness and its characteristic. And this is the part which Sri Aurobindo describes as the, after the fire, the water principle, where these forms have not yet become rigid. They can as if blend into each other. So let's say you have a half materialized apple and a half materialized orange. They can pass through each other. Or your hand could pass through the half materialized apple, but you might, if it's come to the 3rd level, you will feel its density, but it's not rigid. You'll feel it inside your finger. Or the apple will now feel the quality of your consciousness. There's an exchange already happening. This intermissence, blending into each other, is characteristic of the water principle now. Like water, where you can put red color and blue color ink, and the waters will flow into each other and blend, but it's still red and blue ink, isn't it? So that blending character is now happening in his relationship with the earth. So he says, he felt a sap of life, a sap of death. Now, in the higher worlds, you do not have this. Neither life as we experience it, nor death, because all is of a very different grade. Even one may say a light of consciousness. Here, you begin to experience this juice entering into you substantially, as a mood, as a force, as a substance, blending right through you. You're feeling it everywhere in your consciousness. Remember, it's not like our physical body where our senses are outside, looking out and receiving from outside. In the subtle body, your senses are everywhere. Every particle, we are not particles, but every part of your consciousness is simultaneously seeing. And so as you enter the physical world and you're materializing, you're experiencing the entire mood and substance, the sap of the physical world, all the way right through you, in the very innards of your materializing consciousness. And so he felt a sap of life, a sap of death. The sap word is again suggestive. It's like it's the juice of the plant. It's as if the essence of the plant. You could crush the plant and take away all the substantiality of its solidity. The juice would carry its nutritional or its medicinal qualitative value. And juice you can drink, or you can absorb through the skin, apply it and it gets absorbed. It can blend in with other things. So this is the experience, the juice, the sap, the sap of delight is the term used in the Veda. But here this is sap of materiality. Delight is almost now forgotten in this. And it fills him. He's drinking this, not through the mouth, in every pore, in every part, in every substance of his materializing body. The whole sap overwhelms. And finally, the last stage of materiality, into solid matter's dense communion, plunging, and its obscure oneness of forms, he shared with a dumb spirit identity. So who's plunging? He is plunging. See, the description is of materializing. The last stage, entering matter's dense communion. First, you felt the aura, the mood, the energetic quality of the space. Oh, in this place where I'm coming, this is the state, this is how people are feeling. This is how Earth feels. And maybe different planets have different moods. And finally, the solid material communion, your body, but it's still material body, not yours. And you're communing with this materiality. Plunging in this dense communion, this descending movement, but which hits its last stage of total rigidity and hard character of the matter. plunging, and its obscure oneness of forms. He shared with a dumb spirit identity. So he's blending these realms from above where he comes from all the way to matter. And as he's entering this whole experience, he has not lost his divine perception. He beheld the cosmic being at his task. His eyes measured the spaces, gauged the depths. His inner gaze, the movements of the soul. He saw the eternal labor of the gods and looked upon the life of beasts and men. So as a divine being, although he has materialized, he sees the divine working all the way down into this materiality and this humanity and animality into which the gods are laboring behind the scenes, which people cannot see, but he's able to see all this. And what happens now to him? A change now fell upon the singer's mood. A rapture and a pathos moved his voice. He sang no more of light that never wanes, the oneness and pure everlasting bliss. He sang no more the deathless heart of love. His chant was a hymn of ignorance and fate. And you should read the rest on your own because I will not continue here. But you see, this description is so fascinating. Because in this same passage, you have, well, the spiritual experience, the way the divine creates the physical universe through the 5 stages, but also how a being materializes through the 5 stages to materialize into the physical universe, to interact as a physical being. But it also describes the whole technology of materialization, or the other way, from bottom up, the underlying reality of our physical, tangible matter. What makes it what it is. So I will skip this now and go to another passage, which would be in some way complementing this, because we are just on this borderline of materialization. So there's another passage where Sri Aurobindo speaks of the subtle physical matter. Coming top down, you're in the subtle body, and before you've entered the physical world with its physical inertia, density, and darkness, you are passing through a subtle physical matter. Matter which is physical and yet has the characteristics of subtlety of spirit. And this goes to one of the very early passages in Savitri, Book 2, Canto 2, The Kingdom of Subtle Matter. And the page is 106. Here, Ashwapati is going bottom up. He is going to explore all the worlds. He is going to ascend the stairs of the worlds. And he has taken his first entry out of the physical domain and entered the kingdom of subtle matter. He describes in the earlier passages how this world represents a bridge between the physical world and the subtle. And this is something which is for us a bit difficult to recognize because of the way we experience the physical world only in terms of its dullness and inertia. But matter need not be only this. There are gradations of physical matter which are of finer grade. So this is the reason why in the Veda there is this phrase, 7 earths. They're all earth, they're all matter, but there are 7 gradations even in matter. And on those gradations, you have the same materiality of our physical, gross physical world, same materiality, and yet it has characteristics of the finer worlds. So if you see in the previous lines, he speaks of these things. Occult behind this grosser nature's walls, a gossamer marriage hall of mind with form is hidden by a tapestry of dreams. Very suggestive words. So marriage hall of mind with form. Mind essentially is even as formless, and yet when it leans into materiality and enters material world, which is domain of form, what happens there? Occult, that is hidden behind the grosser nature's walls. There's a subtle nature. And what is this? Hidden by a tapestry of dreams, suggesting that this domain normally we can only enter in our dream state. And heaven's meanings steal through it as through a veil. a finer consciousness with happier lines, etc. Don't read, you have the point I want to come to, the lines I want to come to. After he's described all this domain of the subtle matter, he says, this is the eternal being's first transparent robe. So the robe being matter itself as the covering that spirit takes. And so spirit and matter uniting is the content with the covering, the rope. But this is the first transparent robe. It's transparent because it has not yet got the ignorance, inertia of gross physical matter. It is subtle physical matter. And it has the characteristics of spirit. It is transparent. And the finer gradations of the subtle worlds literally can experience realities of the higher spiritual worlds, but in a density which is all material. So, after having described this, he says, but how did this happen? For long before Earth's solid vest was forged by the technique of the atomic void, a lucent envelope of self-disguise was woven around the secret spirit in things. Interesting. So, the secret spirit in things is always in things. Well, it is secret. You don't see it. It is the essence which makes flower flower. But you don't see, you see only the form of flower. The essence of flowerness as consciousness is that secret spirit. So around this is woven a lucent envelope of self-disguise. The spirit has to disguise itself by this envelope, but the envelope is transparent. And this is the base upon which, or from which, Earth's solid vest is forged by the technique of the atomic void. So at this stage, you can have the lucent disguise of the flower, and literally you will have flowerness of flower in form and even in a subtle materiality which you can receive. And flowers, the most delicate of them, have much more of this substance. There are flowers which literally live for a night only, not even a whole day. And one of the most interesting of these, which is one of the most powerful in its perfume, Mother has named supramental riches. It blooms, begins to bloom at sunset, peaks at midnight, and by morning has faded. Huge flower like this, and gives off such a strong perfume, golden colored. Why does it last so little? Because the bulk of its experience is on that subtler grade, very little of the material support. And all the delicate flowers are like that, they hardly last. And today with genetic manipulation, we've hardened the flowers to make them last so that you can transport them over a few days, but you're losing that finer grade of subtlety. And the physical result of it is you lose the perfume. The finer gradations which are really represented in the perfume. So all this is to explain there is a subtle form, and around this is Earth's solid vest was forged by the technique of the atomic void. Now here's a contradiction. Solid vest by technique of void. How does that happen? So the suggestion is the solidity itself is not real. It is formed by this whirling, which creates the appearance of solidity because something is repeating round and round and round. It's moving so fast that you say, here's a ball. And that's how an atom looks to us. Or the joint atoms molecules seem to be. And when those combined molecules, you're combining until you have the illusion, my body is solid. But according to current physics, your body is 99.9999% empty space with only the whirling of particles. But if you look inside the particles, they are not particles, they are nebulous energy bundles. So actually it is 99.99999999999% empty space. You can go on. Actually it's empty space, but with the appearance of this solid vest. It's like a shield covering. But what's inside is the lucent envelope of self-disguise for the secret spirit in things. So first it weaves this, then around that it puts on this solid vest by the technique of the atomic void. So finally, what is there? The solidity is an appearance. And so he plays with this also in subsequent lines where he speaks of this whirling nature, whirling character of matter and the world as we experience it. We will jump now to another passage, which again continues this idea. This is Ashwapati going further up. Now he goes to Book 2, Canto 5, The Godheads of the Little Life, page 154. And now what happens here, the same idea of what we just read, the technique of the atomic void, is elaborated upon. What is this technique? How does it work? And where does it lead to? 154. He says, at the outset of this enigmatic world, which seems at once an enormous brute machine and a slow unmasking of the spirit in things, in this revolving chamber without walls. Interesting. Conceive of what that is. Revolving chamber without walls. That's the universe, whirling. In which God sits impassive everywhere, as if unknown to himself and by us unseen, in a miracle of inconscient secrecy. And now he builds on this idea. In this whirl and sprawl through infinite vacancy, the spirit became matter and lay in the whirl. A body sleeping without sense or soul. A mass phenomenon of visible shapes supported by the silence of the void appeared in the eternal consciousness and seemed an outward and insensible world. So technique of the atomic void, it's still this silence of the void, but it's put on this appearance. And so this he then builds on, and he explains how this is really the first perception we have of the physical world. Because we are going bottom up, we see its materiality and only the outer solid vest. Then comes another interesting passage which replicates what we have already read first when Narad was materializing. This is page 155. He describes how this pure force became appearance of matter. At first was only an etheric space. Its huge vibrations circled round and round, housing some inconceived initiative, upheld by a supreme original breath. Expansion and contraction's mystic act created touch and friction in the void. So you have the ether principle, air principle, and then from there into abstract emptiness brought clash and clasp. And so from here the fire comes. Parent of an expanding universe in a matrix of disintegrating force, by spending it conserved an endless sum. So this is the pure energy before it has taken form. But it's spending unendingly, humongous. On the hearth of space, it kindled a viewless fire that, scattering worlds as one might scatter seeds, whirled out the luminous order of the stars. So he's describing how the stars are whirled out by this viewless fire being kindled by the air principle going through this action of clash and clasp, concentration, intensification, and the intensification, the tapas, is the fire which it gives birth to, which then scatters out all these like seeds, the worlds, and the luminous order of the stars. He's not describing the Big Bang here. He's describing how these things are thrown into materialization. And the suggestion is actually more aligned to a universe which is eternal, in which these things materialize and then disintegrate, and materialize and disintegrate unendingly. So there are appearances which might seem like Big Bang, but in the long run, you do not see Big Bang. You see universe everywhere. But I leave that as my understanding of it. One may believe it in whatever way one chooses. From here now, very interesting. And again, it gets to hardcore physics. An ocean of electric energy formlessly formed its strange wave particles, constructing by their dance this solid scheme. Ocean of electric energy. This is the underlying reality of all seen from matter. You see, everything is electrical. Everything is fields. In fact, increasingly now, there is a shift among many scientists to move out from the old atom particle construct, which is a bottom-up view, to the underlying reality of energy, which is electric. And so you will see it's called the electric energy theory, the electric universe theory. Some other terms they use, but the electric universe is what is the keyword you can search for, where they say finally, there's no such thing even as a particle. It is only the electric field of the particle that you meet and interact with. It is fields interacting with fields. All is fields and all is electric fields. Even what we call gravitational field is only a side effect of electric fields. So we can say actually the whole world is formed of just one gigantic ocean of electric fields in which there are all these agglomerations of fields and interactions of fields. There's an extraordinary scientist, little known, unfortunately, who is built the entire physics just from this assumption that everything is made of one ocean of electric energy or fields. So he says there's an ether, and the ether is electric in characteristic. And from this, he builds all of current physics, all of current particles, and he is the only theory which can actually calculate from first principles the gravitational constant, fine structure constant, proton-electron mass ratio, and the Hubble constant, and 6 constants, which we measure, we do not know why. He derives from theory. And his name is Howard. I'll come back. So a British scientist. I had occasion to meet him a year before he died, but this is really the underlying reality, electric ocean. Constructing this solid scheme by their dance. You stop the dance, the solid scheme vanishes. Okay, this is all current physics in a sense, but he's giving you the underlying occult layers which current physics does not yet know. And its mightiness in the atom shut to rest. And the next step, masses were forged or feigned and visible shapes. So when you say mass, forged, oh yes, this is real. No, it's not, it's pretense, it's feigned. Pretentious masses, it's not real. And the photons, swift revealing spark, light flung the photons, swift revealing spark, and showed in the minuteness of its flash, imaged this cosmos of apparent things. Now this photon is very important because it's the particle through which the perception is taking place. It is one of the functions of the fire principle, but allows you to see. Thus has been made this real, impossible world. An obvious miracle or convincing show. So if you accept the world as real from a physics point of view, yes, I can touch it, it's real, it's a miracle because you can't explain it. If you explain it by other means, then you say, well, it's an appearance. The reality is different from what it appears to be. So it's a show, but very convincing, isn't it? Or so it seems to man's audacious mind, who seats his thought as the arbiter of truth. Now, having said all this, he then describes how life emerges, mind emerges, and so on. And then there is this whole transition that takes place. Finally, he says, when this mind has convinced itself that this is all and this is the whole truth that it has found, the whole thing breaks down into this quantum perception where it is chance which is building everything. I will skip this now. So he literally describes 3 stages of science. First, the science which sees the universe as a giant brute machine. And then science which becomes quantum, which says, no, but actually it's all energy and playing with chance. And then the problem, of course, is in the first case, there is no soul. You do not need soul. In the second case, everything is chance and there is no purpose. And he says, thus the human soul might lose its way, if not for the fact that the spirit within us asserts itself. And then a whole new science eventually has to emerge, which recognizes the place of spirit. So I'm going to skip this now. Oh, no, I'll come to that. This is, in fact, in a separate passage. We come to page 254, where he describes these three stages of science. So he has described in page 253 how the world is actually seeming to be like a very mechanical, hard reality. 254 we come. The void was left bare and vacant. Everything is matter and so on. And then, but when on matter's rock of ages based, a whole stood up firm and clear cut and safe. This is Newtonian science. All staggered back into a sea of doubt. This solid scheme melted in an endless flux. She had met the formless power, inventor of forms. So science started with this very material, physical perception of the universe, where it had no need for anything else. Matter was the only reality. Suddenly now everything collapses. Why? Because science has met the formless power, inventor of forms. This is what we've been discussing in the top-down description of the 5 elements. Science touches that. And suddenly for that power, it seems there's no rigidity of forms. Everything falls apart. Suddenly she stumbled upon things unseen. A lightning from the undiscovered truth startled her eyes with its perplexing glare and dug a gulf between the real and the known. Now you'll see the biggest problem of science today. What we know and what is real. We cannot bridge these two. We cannot even know whether what we know is real. This is the biggest problem. So one of the conclusions is that we can only be agnostic, or we can just say everything is illusory. Even the universe is just a simulation. That's the more popular phrase. If you want to be new agey, this is the keyword. You're on the cutting edge by saying the universe is a simulation. By who? How? In what? Who simulates? No, we don't question that. We don't even think about that. It's just a simulation in your mind. So they draw from Buddhism. It's your mind which is seeing. Why is it your mind sees the same as my mind? Well, because there is a cosmic mind. You see, the implications are already dangerous for science. So you pull back from all this. So startled her eyes with its perplexing glare. Once more, the world was made a wonder web, a magic's process in a magical space. Once more, we face the blank unknowable. In a crash of values, in a huge doom crack, in the splutter and scatter of her breaking work, she lost her clear, conserved, constructed world. Science. So Newtonian physics ended, quantum physics began. What happens there? Crash of values. Suddenly everything is subjective. It's the beginning, first signs of the subjective age. Because now even your experiment outcome is dependent on your expectation. So where is objectivity? So all values crash. What remains? A quantum dance remained, a sprawl of chance in energy's stupendous tripping whirl, a ceaseless motion in the unbounded void, invented forms without a thought or aim. Necessity and cause were shapeless ghosts. Matter was an incident in being's flow, law but a clockwork habit of blind force. And the result of this crash in science has implications in society. Ideals, ethics, systems had no base and soon collapsed or without sanction lived. All grew a chaos, a heave and clash and strive. Ideas warring and fears leaped upon life. And this is the character of the last century. The end of science was with the collapse of quantum physics itself, because beyond a point, it could just become agnostic. We do not know, everything is simulation. What is left was the end of the age of reason and what we call modernism, which was led by reason. And with it comes a postmodernism of subjectivism that says, oh, well, your subjectivity is as good as mine. We are all equally true in our subjectivity, and there's no truth. So that's what he's described here. And all you have now is warring ideas. Alone, a process of events was there, and nature's plastic and protean change, and strong by death to slay or to create, the riven invisible atom's omnipotent force. He's describing historically the development of science and the development of the atomic bomb, which comes from this quantum physics knowledge. And at this point, when the atom bomb is created also, this is the condition we are left with, that there's only process of change of events. There's no objectivity. There's no permanence to anything. There's no point to anything even, and no place for ethics and ideals. That's when the atomic bomb is born. Now imagine the danger it has for the earth. So one chance remained, that there here might be a power to liberate man from the old inadequate means and leave him sovereign of the earthly scene. For reason then might grasp the original force to drive her car upon the roads of time. And then what would happen? What would be the aim of this whole effort if we could just harness that energy? All then might serve the need of the thinking race. You see, the idea is now, you have come into this world by chance. There's no point to anything, no ethics or ideals or purpose to it all. So what do? You seize upon the force and make everything move according to your will, because that's the only thing that matters, isn't it? All then might serve the need of the thinking race. An absolute state found orders absolute. The state now becomes absolute. To a standardized perfection, cut all things. In society, build a just, exact machine. Then science and reason, careless of the soul, could iron out the tranquil, uniform world. Make it flat, remove all these creases, remove all the problems. Well, it so happens, for those of you who might know this, in the last few years, there is this forum called the World Economic Forum, which consists of the world's elite power, politicians, bankers, financiers, scientists, and philosophical thinkers who are scientific, reductionist, all gathering together for precisely doing this thing. How can we create this state which will be absolute, in which society could be made this very exact machine? And one of the persons who represents the, let's say, the lead thinker, spokesman, or the visionary for this forum, he is described even as an evangelist, so to say. He openly says this, the belief of the World Economic Forum: we, human beings, and the knowledge that we have through technology, we are God. We are the soul. There is no need for God and soul, because the human beings have been shown to be hackable machines. Where so far we were machines which worked with some kind of an unknown, invisible mechanism of compulsion, now we can hack it. And the way you would hack a computer, seize control of it and guide it to align to make a just, ordered behavior, or, well, make it serve your need and your desire. If all humanity can be hacked, human society can be hacked, well, that's the only thing left to do to bring order in the universe. Well, order in humanity at least. Who would do that? Well, the elite, who have learned to hack, because that is the survival of the fittest, isn't it? That's the logic. We are God, he says. We are soul. You have no need for God and soul, because we can hack you, and that's all that's left of humanity. This is currently actually the larger thinking of a whole global community. So an absolute state found orders absolute. And all this is described. Then science and reason, careless of the soul, could iron out a tranquil, uniform world, a reasonable animal make of man. This would be nature's peak on an obscure globe. The grand result of the long ages toil, Earth's evolution crowned, her mission done. So people have actually said in so many words their vision of it. And then Sri Aurobindo says, yes, it could be like that. In fact, it might be very much, if not for. So might it be if the spirit fell asleep. Man then might rest content and live in peace. Master of nature who once her bondslave worked. If life's dire heart arose not in revolt, if God within could find no greater plan. But, fortunately for us, but many-visaged is the cosmic soul. A touch can alter the fixed front of fate. A sudden turn can come, a road appear. A greater mind may see a greater truth. This might happen. Or if this fails, is there any hope left? Because this too might fail, isn't it? Or we may find when all the rest has failed, hid in ourselves the key of perfect change. Ascending from the soil where creep our days, earth's consciousness may marry with the sun. Our immortal life ride on the spirit's wings. Our finite thoughts commune with the infinite. And this would happen. The magic key within us, or if that's the last resort, in between is the possibility that the greater mind may see greater things. And a sudden turn can come, a road appear. We are in this passage in human evolution. We can hope for this sudden turn or make efforts for this sudden turn and develop our perception and turn our mind to greater truth. Or if all that fails, eventually we will fall back on the secret key, which is the key of perfect change, which is hidden within ourselves, which also we must strive to find. So I think with this, I will pause my sharing. I've gone into a bit of a science which is not just material technological, but into this domain which spans the worlds. And I don't know how you want it, Radhe. Would you like to have discussion with questions, or should we just close?
I think we could have the questions and answers session small. There are several questions here for you.
Okay.
Maybe you see them also. Jill Gilbert is asking you, would two individual beings in the process of descending from the highest realms experience each other as solid because they would be at equal density?
Absolutely true. In fact, this is one of the biggest mistakes we make from bottom-up approach, where we say that physical world is solid, other worlds are not solid. No, not true. You have solidity on each level at the same level. So the vital body meeting the vital body would experience its own tangibility and solidity. But the solidity does not have rigidity as in the physical world. You see, the physical world, the rigidity prevents your body from stretching, prevents the blending of one material into another. Actually, it blends, but it takes a few million years. If you keep under pressure, the atoms begin to blend into each other. I don't know if you're aware, there's a technique of welding in science where they will take two steel pieces, press them against each other so hard that the atoms actually blend into each other and join, and it's welded. It's one of the most effective ways of welding without any heat, no melting involved, just the pressure, and it locks in. So even here we have this, but it is rigidity which is characteristic of the physical world. The moment you go into the subtler gradations of worlds, bodies, you do not have rigidity, but you have solidity. And the solidity is plastic. It can become semi-transparent to each other by a slight shift in vibration. But when you're on the same vibration, you do touch, you do collide, you can also pass through each other. You will feel it. For example, in your subtle body or your subtle physical body, you can walk through a physical wall. You will feel the wall going right through you as if scraping, not surface skin, but all the material inside you, as if something is rubbing against it, and you pass right through it. You can plunge into physical water in your subtle physical body. You will feel the water inside you passing through. And so another subtle physical body you can touch and shake hands and hold, but you can also pass through each other at the same time. But to each other, you are stable and solid.
Oh, amazing. There is another question. Thank you, Sraddhalu, for the amazing explanation on science in Savitri. How can we be conscious in this subtle body, inner being, in dream sleep state? Are these stages of subtlety that we experience in sleep and dreams?
Mhm. Yes, we can all experience this. In fact, we do experience it. For the larger part, we do not remember. You remember as dream after you wake up, because the surface part and the part which experienced it, there's a gap between them. So you have a loss of memory or a loss of continuity. But by a conscious culture, you can develop the capacity to become conscious in the dream state. And then you can become conscious that you're dreaming. That puts you in a state of lucid, what they call lucid dreaming. You're conscious that you dream. And that's very interesting because you can already do things. You can choose to fly. You can go where you want. But you know it's a dream world. The dream world can be a replica of the physical world, not exact. So you can go places, but what you see is of that world, not the physical world. But then there's one more thing you could do. From that dream state, you can dissolve the dream, stop seeing the dream, and by dissolving it, you'll find yourself in your subtle body outside, in an out-of-body experience. Now, at that time, depending on the gradation on which you have become conscious, you may either experience the subtle physical world or the vital or mental or higher spiritual worlds, or even materialize yourself in density of gradation to something which is close to the physical world itself, at which point you are vulnerable to injury also, but you can also move objects. So one of the things which is possible to be done, for example, is you are in your subtle body, you take your hand and densify the gradation of vibration of your fingers, let's say, and almost materialize it to first degree of materialization where it's almost invisible. And then with that, you can push an object, which also happens. And this is what they call poltergeist phenomena. Poltergeist is German for mischievous ghost, but it's now an English term to describe phenomena where beings interfere with physical objects, strange sounds, knocking, things moving, falling, and so on, during seances and such spiritist activities. But yes, all of us potentially can develop capacity to be conscious in these domains, move across the domains. And we are meant to, we are intended to master those domains as much as master the physical world. But we are still, as a race, very infantile. Within the race, there are some who have grown more and so who have a greater, let's say, range of experience, but also access to these experiences. And the rest of us, the day we choose to want to grow up and begin to work on ourselves, will eventually very rapidly catch up, hopefully. In the context of the integral yoga, though, our priority would be changed. Our first priority will be, first of all, to become conscious in every part of our being, in alignment to the psychic aspiration. So even in dream state, if you can maintain the poise of a conscious relationship with the divine, this would be far more worthwhile than just becoming conscious to wander around in your subtle body. Eventually, the two connect, because if you have one, you have the other. But choose your priority of what is more important. Certainly play with the other things also. But if you can consciously cultivate in waking state a conscious aspiration to hold this state of aspiration through the night and persist in this in the waking state, you will find spontaneously in the dream state, you will become conscious, yes, and the aspiration continues. And if it is aligned with the idea that to be conscious in the dream that you're dreaming, you find, it just happened. So the ability to intervene or modify those states starts with changing your waking state in the day. The error we have is we live like somnambulists during the day. So we sleep like somnambulists during the night. Make yourself conscious here in your inner aspiration and in relation to the divine, with the intention that you must have this also in dream state. Within a few days, you'll have experiences of this in the dream state. It happens very quickly.
Thank you so much. This is very useful for our course in conscious sleep. There is one more question, two more. One is longer, one is shorter. What would be the practical implication of spiritual science?
The practical implication would be that our current knowledge of science, as well as the technology that it leads to, would become enormously more powerful, enormously more plastic, and potentially without limits. So one of the things which comes from the implication, Sri Aurobindo speaks of this, because the matter is formed inside out. As you go deeper into it, into the root and the source, you have greater energy, greater power. Now, this Sri Aurobindo gave from the logic of the spiritual science, which physical science discovered as it went along. As you go down the layers, which is counterintuitive if matter was the original basis. The deeper you go into matter, the more energy you find. Isn't that strange? Shouldn't it be the opposite if matter was the beginning? So implied is that that energy is the source, and that means a greater energy is the source of a lesser matter, of a lesser energy, isn't it? So just this reversal, if you take it one more step, it would imply that behind that energy is a conscious awareness, even mind awareness, or a supra-mental awareness. And that means you could actually penetrate with your mind into that layer more easily than you can enter the atomic energy. And from there, modify the atomic energy. And from there, modify the atomic processes. And so you will explain and perhaps put in practice even things which we consider miracles, which sages or saints seem to do so spontaneously. For example, I've shared the story of Ganapati Muni, who was recent, he had even met the mother. He was living with a very poor family, so he felt having taken resources from them, he had to give back something. So he took a 1 anna coin, which is the lowest denomination of coin, held it in his hand as he was narrating stories to the children in the family. And after he had completed, he gives the coin back and it has got transmuted into gold. Now, if you look at the pure physics of it, it would need humongous quantity of energy to transmute each atom. But if you go down to the thing behind the energy, which is consciousness, you can go inside out and you can do the same transmutation. Now, just this opens a way for a whole new technology, where not only your mind could do things directly without needing physical processes, but you could actually create physical processes that correspond to those subjective processes and actually have machines which would represent a consciousness and an energy and would be effectively living machines with which you could interact. And they would still be machinery, in a sense, constructed by us, but would have life force and even mental consciousness. So we have implications, of course, with AI today. What you're seeing of AI is just the tip, just the beginning. There is so much more that is potentially possible. All this suddenly opens out to us once we understand the full spectrum of the real science, the complete science. Because if the divine can build top down, we too can build top down. Or if we build a bottom up, we can assist it by a top down action, which makes the bottom up process more rapid, more complete. Potentially, you discover in technology the creative power of the divine without limits, omnipotence, effectively. These are practical implications. It'll take time, has to be graded. We can't get to there too fast until we grow in consciousness.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful, these kind of to hear about these future possibilities of science and artificial intelligence and the growth of consciousness. Consciousness itself becomes kind of interest to us as human beings. Rather than making gold, we will be interested in living in that consciousness which can make gold without making it. So this is wonderful. Thank you, Sraddhalu. It was very, very informative and interesting, as is always.